film critic Chris Stuckmann has finally released his movie, Shelby Oaks. Now, Chris Stuckmann was at first a celebrated movie critic on YouTube, but then became very controversial when he said that he is not going to be critical of movies anymore, meaning he makes reviews where he talks about the pros but doesn't mention any of the cons, and yet he still calls them reviews. In fact, he is so against being even politely critical towards movies that if a film sells out, he won't tell you. Now, he used to. That's the kind of honest reviewer he used to be.
But not anymore!
So, as a film critic myself, and someone who takes pride in being honest with my viewers, I have completely lost respect for Chris Stuckmann in that regard. Now, the reason I am bringing this up is because this definitely tainted the hype of this movie for me. At first, I was really happy for Chris when he got to make his movie, and I was happily going to see the film to support him. But now a lot of that excitement has gone. With that said, I have a job to do, and unlike Chris, I am going to inform you if this movie is worth your time and money. So, since you can't get Stuckmannized by his reviews anymore, let's see if he can Stuckmannize you in his movies. Now, the movie opens with a documentary about the disappearance of Riley, who is a member of this group of content creators on YouTube called the Paranormal Paranoids. And the film spends about 20 to maybe even 30 minutes of its opening on this documentary. And I thought it was very well done and sets up the film's mystery and tone pretty well. But it did need to be tightened up, because you come to the theater to watch a movie, but this part felt like a YouTube fan film, and spending 20 to 30 minutes on it was too much, so Chris really needed to tighten the scene up a bit. After that, the movie gets started, and we get the opening credits, which were actually pretty cool and stylized. Now, there are two things that Chris does very well in this film. The first is that he does a great job with building up tension. Once the movie got going, I really thought he paced out the exploration and horror sequences very well. There might have been a couple of slow moments, but on the whole, I was really into it. And the second thing he does exceptionally well is the cinematography. The film shoots far above its $1 million budget. I mean, I have seen movies that cost 200 times as much that don't look this good. The movie mostly takes place in the dark and makes great use of its shadows and lighting. And the sets were really good and creepy. The prison set in particular was really effective. The movie also has a handful of jump scares, and I thought they were really well timed and pretty good. The same goes for the acting. Camille Sullivan plays Mia, who is the main protagonist, and she does a really good job. The same for the rest of the actors, but I would say that they are definitely limited by the script, and there are some odd deliveries with their performances, which does speak to this being Chris's first film. And there are quite a few times where the quality dips in this way, which makes it feel like it's a movie from a first-time director. But even having said that, what really carried me through is that I was genuinely intrigued by the mystery element of the film, and I was really rooting for Mia to find her missing sister. Now, here are my problems with the movie, and the main one is the script. Now, I'm not alone. Most of the criticisms towards Shelby Oaks have been directed at the script, specifically the weak dialogue and characters, but I partly disagree. I mean, the dialogue isn't amazing, but I thought about 90% of it was good enough, and the characters aren't deep, but they are by no means empty slates either. There was just enough development given to them that I found myself caring about their predicament. So then, what is my problem with the writing? My problem is that once the story reaches its conclusion, it doesn't make any sense. In fact, it makes even less sense when you leave the theater and reflect on it. The biggest thing that doesn't make sense is the supernatural horror element, to the point that if you took the horror out, then most of the script issues would be gone. And that is the biggest problem. This horror movie would make so much more sense if it wasn't a horror film. I think it would have worked much better as a thriller, because as soon as the dogs and wolves come into the picture, they get no explanation. Even when we start getting answers about Riley, the explanation makes sense until we get to the horror stuff. There is also a satanic ritual that happens in the film, and for some reason, they only do it when Mia shows up. Why? Because Chris Stuckmann wants the horror sequence to take place in front of the main character. But from a writing point of view, it just doesn't make sense. The same with the guy who shot himself. Why didn't he just ding-dong ditch her house and leave the Shelby Oaks tape at her doorstep rather than kill himself with the tape? I mean, whatever the master plan was that Chris was going for, there were so many more simpler ways he could have executed it. And that's the biggest problem with Chris Stuckmann's writing. He had me intrigued, but once he starts to explain, his writing completely falls apart. And this movie has lots of exposition, but by the end, you feel like you still have tons of questions left unanswered. And the movie has a twist horror movie ending, and it wasn't as smart as Chris thought it was. If anything, I thought it actually screwed his movie up. If he simplified the film and took out all of the nonsensical supernatural horror stuff, then I think this movie would have been far more effective. But as is, it just came across as a dumb horror movie by the end, and that's purely down to the writing. Everything else is more than good enough. The investigation, the acting, the tension, the cinematography, the music. But his drawbacks with the writing are the one thing that brings this entire film down. And there are other smaller problems as well that just kind of chip away at the movie's legitimacy. Mainly the character of Mia. As the supernatural element starts to ramp up and reveal itself, she does some really stupid things. Things that dumb horror movie characters would do. And even earlier on in the film, there were other things that just didn't feel right. For example, Mia witnesses a guy shoot himself in broad daylight, and then we cut to hours later at midnight, and she still has his blood all over her face. I mean, I just finished making my versus video of the 3 Carrie films, and in each of them, when Carrie is covered with blood, the first thing she does when she comes back home is wash herself. But this woman keeps the blood on her face, and not even her husband washes it off. In fact, he just says good night and then goes straight to bed and leaves her like that. So there were little things like that that just didn't seem natural. So I applaud Chris Stuckmann for going out there and actually making a movie, but although he had a strong first 2 acts, it was the final act where things started to fall apart, and it turned into that kind of horror movie. So my score for Shelby Oaks is a high 5 out of 10. The movie was just incredibly average, and the more I think about it, the less sense it all makes. And the very next day after I watched this film, I started to completely forget about it. So it's not particularly memorable either. If I were you, I would wait for Shelby Oaks to come out on streaming, then it would be worth a watch. But damn man, that twist horror movie ending really makes it difficult for me to recommend this film, because it falls off a cliff by that point. If you want to support Chris Stuckmann like I did, then watch it in theaters. If not, then streaming is your best option. And with the movie opening in 7th place at the box office, I have a feeling that it will arrive on streaming in no time.